Welcome back, and as part of our observance of this date being 2/22/22, we are also presenting a countdown of some of the top 22 stories of the television era in Buffalo.
We had some help in selecting them from a list of more than 50 possible stories. We formed a panel comprised of current and former members of our news team and some community members. Here's our Dave McKinley with the final part of 22 stories for 2/22/22.
Number 4, Love Canal. When toxic chemicals began gurgling up from basements and sewers in a Niagara Falls neighborhood in the late 1970s, it set off a firestorm above the ground. It eventually led to the evacuation of 800 families and the demolition of more than 400 homes. The name of the neighborhood, Love Canal, became synonymous with environmental catastrophe. The magnitude was so great that President Carter declared it a federal health emergency, and it marked the first time FEMA funds were used for a man-made disaster. Love Canal also became the impetus for the creation of the EPA Superfund and was the first entry on a list of what would grow to be more than 1,700 toxic waste sites tabbed for cleanup across the country. It took years to settle the lawsuits and for anyone to be allowed to buy homes on the outer ring of the disaster area. Many of the chemicals dumped in the 40s and 50s remain, but are contained and monitored for signs of leaching from the area, which is still fenced off today. Number 3, from fire to rust. Since 1900, it stood like a city of its own. The Bethlehem steel plant sprawled over 2 miles of Lake Erie shoreline in Lackawanna. But in 1983, the furnaces of the nation's third largest steel mill, which once employed 22,000 people, went cold and changed the local economy forever. And it wasn't just steel workers out of jobs. Facing a $4 million annual loss in property tax revenue, the city of Lackawanna laid off 100 city workers and 18 police officers. To this day, efforts remain to fill the once bustling site with new industries. Number 2, Attica. On September 9, 1971, inmates at Attica State Prison rebelled and took over the facility. When control was retaken by state police using helicopters, tear gas, and rifles, 4 days later it became and remains the bloodiest prison uprising in U.S. history. 43 lives lost, including 10 prison guards who'd been taken hostage. Most of the deaths were from bullets fired by lawmen retaking the prison. It took more than 3 decades to settle the lawsuits filed by the families of those killed, both guards and prisoners, and with the state paying $24 million, minus $4 million in court costs. Number 1, the blizzard of '77. Now, we've had our share of weather, but this is still largely regarded by many as the biggest, baddest, blowingest, beastliest behemoth of them all. After 34 days of below freezing temperatures and 28 days of snow, a snowpack several feet deep had formed on a frozen Lake Erie. On Friday, January 28th, a weather system with near hurricane-force winds came through and began blowing it into Buffalo. The system stalled. The blizzard raged for 4 days, drifting snow up to 30 feet in height. In the end, the financial tab was $541 million, adjusted for inflation, more than $2 billion in today's money. There were 23 deaths attributed to the storm. A quarter of those were people who froze in their stranded cars in the sub-zero temperatures. The blizzard was national news, and Buffalo became the butt of jokes by late-night talk show comedians. And still to this day, this storm is more responsible than any other for the perception, or in many cases, misperceptions by outsiders of Buffalo's weather.
And as with any countdown, there's a need to mention the honorable mention. Stories also considered and worthy, including 9/11. Terry Anderson, the West of New York native, held hostage in the Middle East for 7 years, and his sister, who worked so hard to get him released, whose name is on the tip of both your tongues right now.
Peggy Say.
Peggy Say for the win. Yes, the Lackawanna Six, those half-dozen men who pled guilty to charges of providing material support to al-Qaeda, the desegregation of Buffalo schools, Nick Walenda's walk over the falls, the list goes on and on. But if you missed any of our 22 on the list, they are all there for you on our website when you look for this story right now at WGRZ.com.
I have to say, I was going to say, outstanding work by you, Dave, compiling that list. I was on that team, and it was an awesome job just to try and rank them, but you told them so beautifully as well.
I appreciate that. And the number one question we're going to get is, how did you pick them? And as my mother always says, very carefully.
You're right.
Right.
But what did you learn from doing this? You've been doing this for several weeks now, putting it
I
together.
learned that, let's say, one of the stories was OJ and the OJ trial. And the one thing that I came away with was, thank God there was no Twitter back then.
Yeah, right.
Right, certainly. Well, it kind of reminds me why I was inspired, and I'm sure you feel the same way growing up here, to get into television news, because the coverage of all of those events have created those images that are indelibly, marked on our minds.
All right.
Great job, David.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Perfect.
Appreciate it.
Thank you, Dave.